Alright everybody, dancingsean here to talk to you about The Boys. I'm going to go over episodes 2, 3, and 4 of Season 1. I'm going to talk about some big moments, some subtle moments, other little observations I've made, some clues that are dropped here and there. I want to talk about a couple themes of the show in general real quick though. Something that's coming up a lot is the idea of what makes a hero. You know, there's the whole show, the premise of this show is the idea that heroes aren't always perfect, righteous Clark Kents and Peter Parkers, that they're even, regular real people make mistakes, have flaws, and that can maybe be exacerbated when you have superpowers. You might become corrupt with power. Even if you're not purely corrupt, you still can make mistakes. And sometimes have moral dilemmas, and a lot of times in our day-to-day lives, our moral dilemmas might be whether or not we offend someone or whether or not someone gets screwed out of $18. But when you're a superhero, moral dilemmas might be whether or not someone lives or dies, or whether or not the public knows the truth about something. So you could see how this show creates some interesting dilemmas for the characters and some thoughts about society and how superheroes should work and maybe how politicians should work or celebrities should work. But the show is definitely making a point of the idea what makes a hero. And it brings thoughts to my mind of Game of Thrones. A lot of you probably know me from going over Game of Thrones with History of Westeros. If you don't know, I won't spoil too much here, but just it's a very strong theme in that world of what makes a knight a knight. The idea that, knights are supposed to defend the innocent, but it's not as simple as that. They also have a loyalty to their lord, but they maybe have split loyalties. They have loyalty to the direct lord, but maybe also to the king or the prince, and different entities might tell them to do different things, never mind their wives or other loyalties they may have, obligations they may have. And that assumes that it's a good knight trying to do the right thing in the first time. Sometimes a knight is a knight just because he kicked butt in combat and got knighted, but he's not really a good person, or because he was supposed to be, he inherited it or was wealthy. So I can't help but kind of relate things to Game of Thrones. This is a pretty broad story that covers a lot of different aspects, so it's not surprising that you would see elements of it in other works of literature or television and such. One other parallel, I haven't dived in too deep, but in the Game of Thrones world, the religion is the seven, and seven is often a theme, a number that has a lot of meanings and symbolism. I'm not sure how much The Boys is actively trying to model after that, but I wonder how much, even accidentally, there are some parallels. Haven't looked into that too deep, but something to think about. Also, another thing kind of on my mind is the 7 deadly sins, and so far I haven't been able to find a good direct correlation between the 7 here and the 7 deadly sins, although certainly there's elements of lust, greed, pride, etc. in some of these characters. But anyway, I wanted to think specifically, or compare specifically, Huey and the Butcher to Arya and the Hound in Game of Thrones. For those of you who aren't familiar, Arya starts off as kind of a young, innocent girl who ends up on this sort of quest for revenge. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, is a knight, a knight of sorts, who is sort of a mentor to her, and he's very cynical and jaded, and it's easy to compare him to the Butcher, and Huey maybe to Arya. Huey starts off kind of innocent and naive and is suddenly on a sort of a quest for revenge. Another one to think about is Starlight and her parallels to Brienne. Brienne is a knight in the Game of Thrones world who is kind of purely righteous compared to some of the others that are kind of shady, and Starlight is also newly knighted, if you will, and kind of seeing that the other people she looked up to as knights aren't really that good of a people, and kind of shaking her worldview, but not shaking her morality. So anyway, without further ado, let me start in on episode 2. The big moment, the big happening of this episode is Huey killing Translucent. It doesn't come till toward the end of the episode, maybe even the final scene of the episode, but it is a big moment, I think, in the show and for Huey's character. Huey seems to be a central, probably, I feel like Huey, so far Huey and Starlight are being presented to us as the central two characters. Certainly is somewhat of an ensemble cast, but it's a big moment for him. He's definitely probably past the point of no return before that, but he's definitely past the point of no return with that happening. In this episode, we start to get introduced to some more characters and some more plot lines. We have another thing I want to point out real quick is I like one element of the editing, one, I don't know, motif or technique that they use is these segues between scenes from YouTube feeds or television feeds, live happenings, something that you might be watching on your phone or on a TV. It's a good technique to both let us know what the common person in the world is aware of. We're kind of seeing what everyone else is seeing. And it's also, I think, a good way to kind of incorporate the reality of daily life. The fact that we do learn about society through the media, through TV, through our phones, and through YouTube and things like that. So anyway, we have, we see that A-Train is having to step in for Translucent. So, the idea that Translucent is missing, that's an issue. We see Huey and the boys. There's kind of two sides of the story. A lot of the story is kind of being presented from two sides, which is the Seven and their ongoings. And sometimes there's some behind-the-scenes stuff with Vought and Madeline, and sometimes it's like what the public is seeing. Sometimes little sub-stories of certain characters like A-Train or whatever. And then on the other side, we're seeing the boys. We're seeing Huey and the Butcher and that crowd. And so they are dealing with the aftermath of Translucent being killed. We see Homelander meeting with Madeline about the mayor of Baltimore that he killed. And it's an interesting moment here where it's hard to peg what Homelander's goals are. It seems like a very odd relationship he has with Madeline. And he doesn't seem... I don't know how to say this, but he doesn't seem necessarily to be on a quest for power, maybe because he already has it. And money doesn't seem to be an issue to him. It makes me wonder what does he care about. And my best guess right now is Madeline. Like he seems to have some relationship with her. He seems to feel a need to impress her. Anyway, something to look out for with his character. It's almost scary. You're not really knowing what he's trying to do or what he wants to do. He's kind of a menacing character. So another thing happening, we see Huey in certain ways kind of losing control. He's like punching the wall. He doesn't know. He's kind of in too deep. He doesn't know how to deal with this. And at the same time, we see Starlight kind of gaining control, kind of like putting the Deep in his place, and she kicks the butt, some vigilante justice on the streets there. By the end of the episode, though, it's kind of switched around. Huey seems to be kind of accepting this new position that he's in, and Starlight's kind of getting in trouble for what she thought was doing the right thing. She's kind of told she has to wear this new outfit just to make herself look sexy for the public. That's kind of disturbing, but also another kind of reality. We see another new character is introduced, Susan, the CIA agent that Butcher seems to have some sort of history with. We also get some neat insights into French's character. I really like this was sort of a subtle moment there when he's talking to Huey and talks about the woman, this elegant, beautiful woman in this dress, and, he was just kind of printed her in his memory, but that she had dirty nails and it seemed out of place with the rest of her presentation. Again, kind of another bit of that motif of like what makes a hero, the image of a hero or versus their real actions versus, what we perceive as their actions or their intentions. But it's also revealed that he kills this woman. It's kind of a dark moment. Kind of other dark little bits of Frenchie are revealed, and so far he seems part of the underground, murderous, sometimes people who are, on the wrong side of the law aren't necessarily bad guys, but he seems like a bad guy. A lot of this show, again, kind of like Game of Thrones, is showing us some gray characters, but he's nothing else. If nothing else, he's intriguing. We get I found a particularly humorous moment and another motif here. of Homelander staring. Starlight is coming into the compound, and he's staring at a poster of himself. And it, again, it's just a humorous image, and maybe harkens to pride of, one of the 7 deadly sins. But we see he's actually looking through the wall with his supervision at Madeline behind, which again is another interesting dynamic of his relationship with her. We hear him tell Starlight in this scene, because she's just in jeans and a t-shirt, not her costume or whatever, and he points out that he gave up his alternate identity a long time ago, he says. And it made me wonder, what he sort of reflected as he said that, if there was a moment when he gave up that identity, and if maybe giving up his alternate identity might have been more than just his alternate identity. Maybe he gave up his morality or his idea of justice or goodness, and he's seeing kind of this naive Starlight character. It makes me wonder if has he always been this sadistic, evil, manipulative character, or at one point was he a more righteous Superman-like character and he's kind of fallen out of control? It makes me think about Maeve. She probably started off kind of young, naive, righteous, like Starlight, but when she got into a position where she was maybe, whittled away at what she thought was right or was allowed to do, the people around her who she thought were one way were a different way, when maybe she realizes she gets rewarded for doing things that are not necessarily the right thing and gets punished, like she might be in real danger when she tries to do the right thing. You could see how maybe someone falls from grace, and I expect to learn a little bit more about her backstory, and I kind of have this hope that maybe she becomes more of a good guy, takes a stand or something. We'll see. But anyway, we have, I think, a good editing moment toward the end of the episode, as we've been following the boys on one side and Homelander on another side. They kind of converge in this tense moment, which includes another staring moment. Homelander staring into that van that he can't see through, which has got to make him suspicious. They're able to distract him without getting caught, but it was a kind of a well built up to suspenseful moment, and another incident of Homelander staring. Another little thought that I had here was Huey keeps being called Petite Huey by Frenchie, and that in my mind, that popped into my mind, Baby Huey. I had that in my brain. I was like, Baby Huey, why am I thinking Baby Huey? And it's a cartoon character from the 90s, maybe even older. And the character was kind of this bumbling, naive character who would just, without even realizing it, just be disrupting the world around him. He'd be bending over to get a can of food, and his butt would hit the villain and knock the gun out of his hand or something like that. And I again, kind of thinking about the Robin Ward character, I wonder about Huey, the choice of his name, what meaning it might have. I should admit, by the way, I know some superficial superhero comic history stuff, but I imagine there's people out there who have much deeper knowledge than me that maybe have some clues to this. If anyone does have any clue as to the meaning behind his name or any other character's name, I'd be happy to hear from you about that. So let's see. We'll go on to the third episode here. The big happening of the third episode was the race. In the race, the core of it is, again, making me wonder about pride of A-Train. He feels like he needs to win. He needs to be the fastest. Maybe it's not that simple. And also maybe there's an amount of, gluttony with his desire to take this drug. But anyway, we see in this episode, Huey's been baptized in blood. The episode picks off right where it left off on the prior episode after having killed Translucent, which I also think is a neat thing to have one episode pick up right where the last one left off. Oftentimes new episodes skip forward hours or weeks even, which there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but especially in a scene where I kind of want to know how the rest of that moment played out. A lot of times, even within an episode, something happens. It's a complaint I have about a lot of film, I guess, is that there's this climactic moment is built up to, and there's this sort of a confrontation. The wife walks in on the husband cheating on him, and then cut to 3 days later, and they're calling lawyers. Like, I want to know how the next 30 seconds, 30 minutes played out. I want to know what they said to each other, what the people around them did. It's often an opportunity for good acting, too. Anyway, they do. In this scene, we get to see the very next moment. Huey decides he needs to go home. He's been missing. He's got to understand his family's looking for him. He needs a change of clothes. He maybe just needs to kind of regroup his mind. And I was reminded in this moment, in this scene, he kind of loses it in his room. He's like realizing all this shrine. His room is like a shrine to the seven. He just kind of trashes it. And they play this dissonant orchestral music there, and I thought it was a really good choice, and it made me think about several other good choices for music. The closing song of the episode before, which I can't get out of mind, Cherry Bomb, and he blows up translucent. And Huey often has music. He has the Ramones, he's got Van Halen. I feel like they're thinking carefully about the choice of music in a show, which I appreciate. I think that is a sign of a good show, is when all the different elements of filmmaking are being put together. Usually the most obvious superficial thing that we're looking at is the plot and the characters, and a lot of times performance is wrapped up in that. And a lot of subtle things happen with editing and directing that we kind of take for granted. Sound, a lot of that stuff, lighting. There's sort of this high floor that almost every show meets. Usually when they don't do it is when we're taking note and complaining, but usually every show is hitting it. But some maybe take more overall care with the set design in the background, with the reality of how well people are using their phones to Google things, and how often they're on the phone or texting, things that really happen in real life being represented in the show, and the use of music. Stuff like that. I think the show is doing a good job with all the different filmmaking elements. I wanted to give the show credit to that. In fact, we get another moment in this episode where Mother's Milk's ringtone is the Rickroll song. The little good use of humor, a good way to get humor in there too. Another thing I appreciate is when you can get humor out of like an editing cut or the use of a song, not just like a one-liner joke that someone tells. I think they're doing a good job all around with the writing, editing, directing, and such. Let's see. We get a couple more clues of things to come. We hear Mother's Milk talking about Mallory and Becca. We don't know who these things are. Slowly they leak out bits of information here and there. And when Homelander's talking to Madeline, she wants him to... She's given him talking points for the press. And he feels like he can handle this on his own. It's not his first rodeo. But she tells him, well, this is from Mr. Edgar. And we're like, who's Mr. Edgar? And Homelander's like, oh, Mr. Edgar, I better do it. I'm like, whoa. Homelander feels, like he needs to answer to someone. This guy has got to be an important character eventually. So let's see. Another good segue, I think, was seeing the training, seeing Maeve training, kind of showing off her potential. And we hear concerns about translucent versus this race that's coming up. It seems like no one is particularly worried about translucent, other than Homelander. They're worried about maybe there's a concern about how the press is going to cover it, but they don't seem to actually be worried about him. And maybe it makes sense because what could you do? He's indestructible, whatever. But on some level, no one seems to be his friend, Anyway, we get another big reveal in this episode as we come to understand what Compound V is. We get another new character, Poplock, and that becomes an in for the boys to get the dirt on A-Train or whoever else. Let's see, another thing, I don't want to skip over anything here. I had another thought that it seems like Maeve and Homelander have history, and I'm sure that has something to do with Maeve's acceptance of the dark side of things going on here. And it also reminded me they talked about having dated and having flown to Paris, And, you realize that he picked her up and flew her to Paris, and she talks about being cold in that flight over the Atlantic. It reminds me in the original Superman, how Superman flew Lois Lane around. It was kind of a romantic moment, and I remember thinking, she's got to be cold, and I appreciate when they address some reality of some of these, superhero moments. So let's see. We get on to a sort of a montage. Another good job with editing, I think, of showing us all the different happenings of the race going on, and Starlight debuting her new outfit. And sure enough, it's gross, if you will. She has a hard time dealing with it. We get her talking about the idea of the powers that be seem more concerned with her looking like a hero than actually being a hero. And let's see, we get another stare down moment. This is Rick, a really cool moment here, okay? When in the race and everyone's attention is off on A-Train and Shockwave, okay? But Butcher is staring back at Homelander. And Homelander catches him staring at him in a crowd, and they kind of like stare each other down. This is the third moment I could think of where we have a stare down moment with Homelander. And it seems like the Butcher is kind of seeing Homelander for who he really is. No one else is. No one is even looking at Homelander, but Butcher's staring him down just like Homelander's been staring other people down. I thought that was a really good visual moment and maybe a really good telling moment about the confrontation between the two coming. You also got to wonder, this episode closes with Homelander showing Madeline, the remains, if you will, of Translucent and a message coming for you. Wonder if Homelander's putting together who it is that's coming for him. So, on to the fourth episode here. In this one, there's, I guess, a couple big happenings. We get another new character, this Asian woman who's been locked up and apparently has superpowers. And we also get the plane scene, which was, man, a powerful, dark moment. It really was tough. This is kind of a tough to watch episode, that sequence especially. It starts off with a flashback. It starts off with Butcher with Becca, apparently, his ex-lover, wife, I think. And it seems like a more innocent time. We see him watching a video of her. Seems like he's obsessed. Of course, we're going to get more details on this. But it made me wonder, at one point, was Butcher a little bit more innocent, like Huey, and he's been set off on his quest for revenge? And how far is Huey from becoming the Butcher? Interesting to think about, what the Butcher had to go through and what might be in store for Huey. We also see a scene of Madeline strategizing now that she knows that, that Translucent was in trouble. And sure enough, there's no, feeling sorry for his family, which, by the way, we find out he had a family. We find out he had a son. But she's only concerned about how to pitch this to the news, She doesn't even seem sad about it happening, and neither do the other PR reps there with her. They're just proud of themselves for coming up with a good cover story, a good spin. It's, a sad thought, and I want to think in a real world that even PR people would have some emotion, some sympathy, but who knows, man? Maybe not. It's hard to say. Anyway. We get, let's see, what else happens here? Another segue moment. I feel like, again, they're consistently using these segues from a shot on TV to kind of give us an update of either what's going on or what the world thinks is going on as we transition to from one set of characters to another. And we see Huey still dealing with PTSD. We get to this plane scene. We get to the hijacked plane scene. And it's really dark, and it's another thing about it I kind of appreciate is that there's a certain reality to how physics works. We have to suspend our disbelief a little bit for these superpowers. But I do appreciate the idea that I think a lot about this scene in the original, or maybe it's Superman 2. There's a scene where the bad guys kind of realize that Superman's weakness is the people. And they can attack the people to distract him or to get to him. And they knock off this tower off a skyscraper, this huge, communications tower where it's falling down, and Superman has to stop punch fighting a bad guy to go stop this tower from falling on people. And he catches it by the base, and, flies it right up. But the thing is, no matter how strong Superman is, the metal of that structure is only so strong. It would bend or break even if you tried to pick it up or hold it, never mind the momentum of it falling. Superpowers, they're kind of magic, we kind of have to accept them, but I still want to believe that the physics of the world still matter. And I appreciate that Homelander explaining to Maeve, like, look, if I try to, lift the plane up, there's still all its weight and inertia. I'll just bust through the fuselage. It's not, I can't stop this plane from crashing. It's not that easy. It's not that magical, And it's kind of his fault that this is happening. He was a little trigger happy with his laser guns. The hijacker pulled a gun on him, but he's bulletproof. He just wanted to murder the guy, and he just destroyed the controls, and now everyone in the plane is doomed. And he is just quick to accept the reality of it. Oh, well, it's going to crash. Let's go. Maeve just can't handle that. She just feels like she has to do something about it. And again, it reminds me of the Brienne character in A Game of Thrones. There's a moment when she's presented with a confrontation that she just can't win. And in her mind, she realizes she can't win this battle, but she can't let these innocents die. And she thinks, I have no chance and I have no choice. And she just charges in even though she knows she can't win just because it's the right thing to do. And that's what Maeve wants to do. Homelander doesn't even give it a second thought. He's not even going to make an attempt to help these people. And once he's kind of made this decision, it's a point of no return. Maeve can't even try to save 2 or 3 because they're witness to this. Oh, it was so tough to watch. It was so tough to, this girl and her mother. Oh, this was a powerful, stressful scene. And I think it was really well done, really well performed, and really adds to Homelander's dark side. And really makes you kind of empathize with Maeve. You want to feel like she is trying to do the right thing, but how can she even do it? She can't force Homelander's submission. She can't fly. She can grab 3 people and jump out, and they're still just going to die, even if she lived. The whole thing was just so tragic and so tough to swallow, and really kind of added to the darkness that the show already has. So, a couple other things happen in this episode I'll talk about real quick. We hear a couple more references as the boys are trying to track down this new superhero entity that they have discovered, and we have this conversation where we get a little bit more about Mallory. Apparently Mallory or her children were killed in some sort of action sequence. We don't get exact details, but it seems like something that was, sometimes fault is hard to assign. Blame is hard to assign exactly. A lot of times if someone did or didn't do something differently, something wouldn't have happened, but still someone else could have done or not done something differently, and it may or may not have happened. It's sometimes really hard to say. Usually there's not one person directly responsible for something. A lot of things are involved, but Mother's Milk seems to be blaming Frenchie for something happening, some decision Frenchie made that ended up causing someone to die. Whether or not he's directly responsible, he feels like he's responsible, and they had this confrontation over it. And then another thing happens here, which I appreciate. It's another example of how I feel people behave in the real world being represented on a show that I like. We in the real world make analogies to things in our culture. And so, even though it might have been a little corny or even misplaced, Butcher and people in general don't always come up with perfect analogies and perfect stories to tell, perfect speeches to make. But what pops into the Butcher's mind at that moment is the Spice Girls. And I love that he uses this whole Spice Girls analogy to try to keep the team together. I thought that was a good moment. So another thing that we see happen in this episode, which is, I will say this is kind of a negative point for me. This is something that kind of bothers me about the show. Something that makes me a little suspicious sometimes about where the show is going overall. But we see the Deep, who already is being painted as a negative character. Maybe not quite in... I want to say he's an antagonist. He's certainly not a protagonist, but it seems like, as crappy a guy as he is, Homelander seems to be such more of a threat, such more of a villain, and maybe Vought and Madeline in general even more than Homelander. It's hard to say how much a corporate entity that includes Homelander could be, how dangerous they could be. Never mind Homelander himself. Another point I wanted to make is that Mallory, or not Mallory, Madeline, the workers, at Vought, seemed to be more afraid of her than Homelander. When she walked into that tech room, they were like, oh, everyone's like, oh god, it's her, whatever you say, ma'am. Homelander was like, oh, hey, oh, cool. They were more starstruck by Homelander. They were afraid of Madeline. Found that very interesting. Maybe they don't know how afraid they should be of Homelander, but the fact that they were that afraid of Madeline was very interesting. Let's see. I guess I should follow up real quick with the train, the plane wreck. The fact that Homelander, who, even though he knew exactly what happened and was pretty much at fault, he still blamed it. He didn't even blame it on terrorists. He blamed it on the government for not making him part of the chain of command. I could have stopped this if you gave me more power. And that's kind of a dark thought. Someone who's already so powerful still wanting more power. But I'm still a little suspicious how much he actually wants this power, or he wants it for the sake of Madeline. It's still interesting to me, the idea that he is probably has millions and millions of dollars and has power more valuable than that money. He seems to be able to do almost anything he wants, but something keeps him in check. Even though he seems to be willing to do straight up immoral things, he still, for some reason, is maintaining this image of a hero. He's maintaining this facade of being a good guy. He seems to be working for working on Vaught's behalf. And I wonder what's motivating him to do it. And the only thing I've got right now is his relationship with Madeline. But anyway, one of the things that bothers me a little bit about this is what's going on with the Deep. That, to be fair, I'm a little biased here because I am a vegetarian. I don't like the idea of killing animals. I feel like I don't want to get too preachy. I don't expect other people to jump on board with me. But for what it's worth, just how I feel, there's enough wealth and knowledge in the world that we can feed ourselves healthily without having to kill animals. And I think there's at least a chance that the animals have some kind of consciousness or awareness that maybe we shouldn't be killing them. I'm not even totally sure about the science or the logic behind it all. It's just kind of a decision I made for myself. But the idea that they keep making animals the butt of jokes, that the suffering of animals even the butt of jokes, it bothers me a little bit. I think this show walks this thin line. It, generally speaking, seems to be championing women's rights, but it also seems to be appealing to machoism, and I'm kind of torn about the show sometimes. It makes sense that some of the violence and the machoism and the flashiness is going to appeal to a broad audience, and I'm glad that broad audience is also being made to think about women's rights. But I wish they would also give some consideration to rights in general. I don't know. I apologize I'm getting too preachy. Hope I don't turn anyone off with this, but just so you know, it's something that bugs me a little bit, and it makes me worry about how true they'll stay to ideas of goodness. We'll see. Versus marketing. Some of the commentary they're making on marketing, I worry that they're just doing it themselves. We'll see. Overall, I like the show. It's making me think a lot. I think it's well put together. But I'm not going to hold back when I think that they do something wrong. Anyway, stay tuned for the next episode. I'll cover the next few episodes of The Boys, hopefully in the next couple days here. Subscribe to my channel. I think that's the thing I'm supposed to be saying here. And follow me on Twitter, dancingsean.